747 flying towards South Africa fills with smoke. A fire has erupted in the cargo area, but the plane can't land. It's too far over the Indian Ocean.
The first thought, I think, for many, many South Africans was what was on that plane.
The passengers are choking on toxic fumes.
Request a full emergency, please.
Affirmative, that's Charlie, Charlie.
There's only one way to clear the smoke. The crew must try a rarely used and risky maneuver.
Open the doors.
Open the doors in flight.
Springbok 295, places.
It's a race against time as the plane burns up. It must reach land before it crashes into the sea.
Springbok 295, places. Mayday, Mayday.
On November the 27th, 1987, a South African Airways 747 flies from Taiwan back home to South Africa.
Everything good?
Fine, Captain. Ready to take over?
Yes, thanks.
9 hours into their flight over the Indian Ocean, the main crew returns to their seats, allowing the relief crew to rest. The crew prepares for a scheduled stop on the island of Mauritius. Valerie Lottering has enjoyed her first overseas vacation, joining her husband Corrie while he was on business.
My father was on a business trip, and my mum had gone with for holidays. My dad had actually gone to the east to secure cell phone technology, which was just sort of happening in South Africa at the time.
The plane is a modified 747 known as a combi, short for combination. A passenger plane and a cargo plane in one, it's designed to accommodate flexible quantities of passengers and cargo. The combi has a large cargo area down below, like a regular 747. The combi also has a large cargo area right behind the last row of economy class seats. The cockpit sits one level above the cabin.
You could load from 6 to 12 pallets on the main deck, adjusting the bulkhead for the number of passengers you wanted to carry. And this turned out to be a very worthwhile and useful tool.
Flight 295 is carrying 159 people, as well as 6 large pallets of cargo. Known as the Helderberg, the 747 Combi is a vital member of the South African Airways fleet. It's particularly useful for long-range flying.
For South African Airways, during the days of apartheid, a plane like the Combi helped them in that respect, because they had to fly around the bulge of Africa over the Atlantic.
To protest South Africa's white racist regime, the vast majority of black African states refused to allow South African Airlines to fly over their airspace, causing them to fly longer routes.
There were sanctions, heavy sanctions against South Africa on political, economic, and cultural fronts. South Africa was not welcome anywhere credible in the world.
On Flight 295, less than an hour before its stop in Mauritius, the smoke alarm breaks the calm of the cockpit. It's for the cargo area on the main deck, directly behind the passengers. By the time the crew gets to it, the fire is raging.
It's bad.
Shall I get another bottle over there?
Yeah, hurry.
Read out the fire checklist for us, please.
In fire emergencies, the crew follows a standard checklist to extinguish the fire.
The breaker popped as well, huh? We'll check the breaker panel as well.
The fire is burning through the plane's wiring, causing short circuits.
Move as far forward as you can.
But there's a more immediate problem. Passengers are having trouble breathing.
Duct isolation valve switches, open. Pack valve switches, all open. Recirculating fan switches, off.
The fire checklist instructs the pilot to land at the nearest airport, but the closest one is on the island of Mauritius, still more than 300 kilometers away. There's not a lot Captain Ace can do. He asks a member of his flight crew to help fight the cargo fire.
Bring me another bottle.
Captain Ace initiates an emergency descent. He calls the airport on the island of Mauritius, which is on good terms with South Africa. It's just before 4 in the morning when Mauritius Air Traffic Control receives the call.
Mauritius, Springbok 295.
Springbok 295, Mauritius. Good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. We have a smoke problem and we're doing emergency descent to level 140.
Confirm you wish to descend to level 140.
Yeah, we've already commenced due to a smoke problem in the airplane.
Do you request a full emergency, please?
Affirmative. That's Charlie.
Captain Ace sounds calm, but he has to find a way of getting rid of the smoke on his plane. Whatever's burning in the cargo hold is producing thick, noxious smoke which is pouring into the cabin. It could be deadly to the passengers.
Your actual position, please. Say again?
Actual position.
Captain Ace is losing power to many of his instruments.
We've lost a lot of electrics. We haven't got anything on the aircraft now.
He's not sure where he is. The airport prepares for an emergency landing, while the crew of the Helderberg follows instructions from another checklist to get rid of the smoke.
Supplementary vent fan switch, off. Recirculating fan switches, on. Smoke condition.
Hold on, I'll check downstairs.
The crew gets more bad news from the cabin. The smoke is getting thicker.
It's worse.
We can't breathe down here.
With the plane approaching an altitude of 4,500 meters, the checklist advises the captain to execute an emergency maneuver that few pilots have ever performed.
We need to open the doors. Repeat, open the doors.
Opening the plane's doors in midair is the only hope for thinning a cloud of smoke that could kill the passengers before the struggling jet can land. As the cabin of South African Airways Flight 295 fills with smoke, there's only one way to save the passengers from the lethal fumes.
Out of flight level 150 for 140.
150 for 140. 150.
The captain begins his emergency descent to 4,500 meters so the doors can be opened. At 4,500 meters, passengers can breathe the outside air. At that altitude, the difference in pressure between the air inside and outside the cabin is enough to force the cabin air out quickly, but not dangerously. Now the captain must dramatically reduce his airspeed to 370 kilometers an hour, 200 knots. Any faster and the crew won't be able to open the doors.
This is Captain Oy speaking. We're opening 2 of the entry doors to clear smoke from the cabin. Do not panic. You'll be much more comfortable once we complete this procedure.
You just crack the door, and this generates a tremendous amount of airflow through the airplane.
Blazon Springbok 295. We've opened the doors to see if we can... we should be okay.
Out there!
Close the bloody door. Joe, switch up quickly. Then close the hole on your side.
Smoke is now building in the cockpit, but there's no outside door to open.
Temperature is 22.22, and the QNH is 1018 hectopascals. 1018 over.
The air traffic controller now focuses on giving the captain the information he needs for an emergency landing.
Roger, 1018.
Affirmative. And both runways are available if you wish. And 295, I request pilot's intention.
We'd like to track in on 13.
Confirm runway 13.
Charlie, Charlie.
Affirmative, you're cleared direct to Foxtrot, Foxtrot. You report approaching 50.
Okay.
Captain Ace has one hope. He must make it to the island of Mauritius, 265 kilometers away. The Helderberg continues on its desperate journey.
295, play sense.
But at 4:08 in the morning, a call by the air traffic controller is not returned.
Springbok 295, play sense. Springbok 295, play sense.
With no response from Flight 295 for 36 minutes, Air Traffic Control Mauritius formally declares an emergency. An alert goes out to search and rescue crews. Several aircraft take off from Mauritius and search the dark waters for the missing plane, but find nothing. At the airport in Johannesburg, South African Airways officially declares Flight 295 delayed.
We were supposed to be going away on our annual holiday, so we were all very excited because from picking them up, my parents up from the airport, we were supposed to go off to a 3-week holiday. I think that's maybe the extent of the differences of the emotions, is that you're so anxious and excited for them to come home, and then the absolute devastation of the news, getting the news, you know, that the aircraft has gone missing.
In the afternoon of the next day, a rescue plane spots the first signs of floating aircraft wreckage. Rennie van Zyl, the head of South Africa's Aviation Safety Board, is assigned to the Helderberg case.
A normal investigator will only handle a major accident about once in 20 years in his career. So this was quite a big wake-up and a challenge to us to start running with this investigation in that morning.
8 bodies are found in the water, all suffering from extreme trauma.
It was around about 2 o'clock that we, in fact, were advised that wreckage and an oil slick had been spotted. And it was then quite apparent that the airplane was lost.
The most astonishing thing is that my parents had actually, the night before they had flown, had sorted out their wills, had sorted out their insurances, had sorted out all of their documentation and paperwork before they flew, which was quite amazing. My father made very, very close family friends of ours, our guardians, our godparents, and we were to live with them.
South Africa quickly becomes obsessed with what caused the crash. In the early days, there's very little to examine, only small bits of the plane that are floating on the surface. Contained within that debris, Rennie van Zyl's team discovers 3 wristwatches. The watches give them a probable time of impact.
These wristwatches were in fact part of the baggage, and when examined we were able to find that the one had stopped and 2 others were still running, and the 2 running ones were the exact Taiwanese time, but the stopped one did give us the minute indication of what we could establish as the impact time of the airplane.
The impact time is only 3 minutes after the last communication with the plane. The Helderberg's demise was sudden and dramatic. In the press and in public opinion, it reinforces the idea that something sinister brought the plane down. In the years leading up to the crash, South African Airways offices around the world had been the target of protests.
The South African Airways airline at that particular time was a government body. It was owned by the government. It was the national carrier, but it was also very much perceived to be part of the South African government. So another aspect of this plane crash and another theory that was put around was that there could have been a bomb in the cargo, that in fact we were a target. South Africa, or this SAA plane, was a target of terrorists who had the worst interests of this country at heart.
Experts examine the small bits of wreckage they have, searching for the telltale signs of an explosion: impact cavities, surface pitting, or spatter cavities. Spatter cavities are caused by the white-hot fragments from a high-explosive device striking and melting the light alloys of the aircraft structure. But experts spot no sign of an explosion. And when air traffic control tapes are studied, Van Zyl hears that the crew appeared to be coping with the emergency.
Layson, Springbok 295, we've opened the doors to see if we can... we should be okay.
We've had rumors of atomic bombs, for example, in the airplane. That won't cause the airplane to burn. It will take out the airplane. We did not have that same experience here. This airplane flew for 22 minutes. It's out of the ordinary circumstances. This was not an explosion that took out the airplane.
With just small pieces of the plane to study, investigators are stumped. They don't know what caused the fire or what role it played in the destruction of the plane.
The obvious thing to do was to go and try and retrieve the cockpit voice recorder, the flight data recorder, and as much wreckage as we can from the aircraft to establish what really had happened.
The problem is Van Zyl doesn't even know where to find the underwater wreckage. It could be far from the floating debris. No one is sure exactly where the plane crashed. He turns to the United States looking for help. An American salvage company is hired to find the wreckage and black boxes, but time is running out. The boxes have built-in locating devices called pingers, which run on batteries and will eventually run down.
A driving factor was that the pinger on the data and voice recorders was transmitting, and it only had a 30-day guaranteed shelf life. If we couldn't get out there in 30 days, the chances were that we wouldn't be able to detect it.
By the time the proper equipment can be assembled in the Indian Ocean, only 7 days remain before the batteries and the pingers will die out. Meanwhile, blood tests are performed on the human remains pulled from the debris field. All show traces of soot in their trachea. It's determined that at least 2 of the passengers died from smoke inhalation. Investigators face a disturbing realization. Even as the crew was struggling to land their plane, some of the passengers were already dead. While searching for the black boxes, investigators continue to examine the floating wreckage. Amongst the hundreds of recovered items, a partly melted graphite tennis racket offers a telltale clue about the fire. Graphite only burns at temperatures greater than 600 degrees Celsius. Investigators now know that the fire on the Helderberg was extremely hot. This discovery may explain why a fully charged extinguisher from the front of the plane is recovered with other floating wreckage. Investigators notice a melted piece of cargo netting on the outside of the extinguisher. They determine that the extinguisher is from the passenger cabin, suggesting that as the fire burned, a crew member grabbed the extinguisher and brought it to the cargo area.
A full fire extinguisher in a plane that was brought down by a fire shows that for whatever reason it wasn't discharged because the crew member couldn't access the area because of the heat, or the fact that there was melted metal on the fire extinguisher is further evidence to the intensity of the fire.
Before this accident, in the 20-year history of the 747 Combi, no one had ever died from fire or smoke.
When we heard about a fire in the Helderberg, this was the first time for a wide-body airplane. It It was news, and because it was so new, and the thought was that we really couldn't have anything like that.
What could have caused such an intense fire on the Helderberg? Was it a wiring problem on the plane, or had the cargo itself somehow started the blaze?
Initially, the investigation, of course, focused on what was the cargo. The fire obviously had originated in the Mayday cargo compartment, so the logical thing is to look what did the waybills indicate was carried in the airplane.
Investigators learned that there were 6 pallets of cargo on board Flight 295. Using master waybills, Van Zyle's team is able to determine that 47,000 kilograms of baggage and cargo was officially on board. Investigators discover that before takeoff, a Taiwanese customs official performed a random inspection of some of the cargo. He found nothing suspicious. More than ever, investigators need to find the rest of the plane and locate the Helderberg's black boxes. But 30 days after the crash, Van Zyle's team gets some very bad news. There's still no signal detected from the black boxes, and they're still not certain exactly where the majority of the wreckage is. So far, the search has cost $1.5 million, and the team has been unable to locate vital evidence. The Helderberg crash is quickly becoming a test of Van Zyle's abilities and his resolve. The investigation reaches a standstill. Van Zyl has failed to discover the cause of the fire or even find the plane's wreckage. If he keeps looking, it'll cost millions more. And the chances of success are getting increasingly remote.
This wasn't just an airplane, this was a Boeing 747. It was the largest airplane of its type. And this was a 747 of South Africa's national airlines. Hundreds of thousands of people who flew the 747 every day at that time were dependent on a satisfactory answer as to whether or not this aircraft was safe and whether or not there were any structural or design deficiencies in the airplane. So the stakes for us were quite large, and the stakes for Mr. Van Zyl as the head of the South African investigation were enormous.
It would have been very, very easy for the South African government to say, the water is too deep, it's too far from Mauritius, we cannot investigate this accident.
Well beneath the grey waves of the Indian Ocean, the wreckage of the Helderberg remains hidden. Now one man, René Van Zyl, must decide whether to spend the money needed to recover the plane's wreckage. But almost 2 months after the Helderberg slammed into the Indian Ocean, no one even knows the precise location of the main wreckage. Van Zyl decides he must try to recover what he can.
Without the wreckage, we'll never know the truth.
So they spent on one investigation what we spent in 6 months of conducting all of our investigations in the United States.
Before investigators can salvage the Helderberg, they must find it. The wreckage lies somewhere very deep underwater. 61 days after the crash of the Helderberg, Van Zyl receives some intriguing news from his team. Sophisticated sonar equipment has detected a large object 4,400 meters underwater on a flat plateau. It could be the Helderberg.
And they presented me with a piece of paper with a lot of black dots of various sizes on it, and they said, that's your wreckage. And my question to them was, how do I know it's the wreckage of the 747? Maybe this is a submarine from the Second World War or something. And the response was just, René, it is it, because we tell you it is the wreckage.
But no one's ever gone that deep to salvage anything, including the Titanic. Van Zyl has no choice. To find out whether the sonar images are in fact the wreckage, he must launch the most expensive part of the investigation, Operation Resolve. A remote-controlled sub called the Gemini will be sent to the ocean floor to videotape what's there. If it is the Helderberg, the Gemini will search for key items, including the black boxes. The problem is that the mini-sub must be attached to the mothership by a flexible fiber optic cable that's almost 7 kilometers long. No cable that long has ever been built.
We needed a 20,000-foot cable. There was no existing cable, so we had to go to a cable manufacturer and get a cable designed and built.
But before the fiber optic cable is assembled, Van Zyl launches a separate investigation into the firefighting capabilities of the Helderberg. He would discover that the very design of the combi may have doomed the flight. Investigators want to know whether the combi was properly designed to protect the passengers on South African Airways Flight 295 from fire.
The smoke should not have entered the combi's cabin.
The American team leader in the investigation, Barry Strauch, goes to Boeing's headquarters in Seattle to find out how the combi was tested for certification in fire prevention. Strauch's team learns that to comply with federal regulations, Boeing's fire tests were conducted by setting a bale of tobacco leaves on fire. When a technician enters the cargo area to fight the demonstration fire, no smoke enters the passenger cabin. The smoke remains localized. The fire is quickly extinguished.
Well, that was in the test conditions that Boeing used to get the airplane approved. But in the reality, as we saw in this accident, it didn't work that way because you didn't have a nice clean fire with fans blowing the smoke towards the ceiling. You had pallets, you had a fire that would have grown considerably before the smoke was generated, and you had plastic sheeting that would provide fuel to the fire, in addition to all the cardboard and packing materials within the pallets themselves.
The combi is designed to prevent smoke from entering the passenger cabin. The air there is kept at a slightly higher pressure than in the cargo area. When the door between the two is opened, the air should flow into the cargo area, keeping the passengers safe. Investigators then conduct their own test. They set a large pallet of tightly packed cargo on fire, mimicking conditions on the Helderberg. The blaze is more intense and the temperature is hotter. Investigators discover that this much hotter flame has a radical impact on the air in the cargo hold. When the cargo door is opened, the smoke now flows into the passenger cabin.
Boeing tests used tobacco leaves in batches of tobacco. In the fire in the Helderberg, it was a very, very different fire than the kind of smoke-generating fire that Boeing used in their tests. Heat would have been generated within the cargo compartment that would have created its own pressure and would have negated the pressure differential between the cargo compartment and the passenger compartment. Without the pressure differential, there would be nothing to restrain the smoke and keep it on the cargo side. And therefore, the smoke would have penetrated into the passenger side, smoke that contained, as we know, carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide.
Then investigators discover something potentially more lethal. As the passenger cabin filled with smoke, a checklist instructed the crew to turn on the cabin's recirculating fans. The intention of the checklist is to dissipate the smoke in the passenger cabin after the fire has been extinguished.
Recirculating fan switches on.
But in this case, turning the fans on may have been deadly. Fans draw air from above the cabin's ceiling and from the cargo compartment before recirculating it back to the passengers.
The carbon monoxide levels were extremely high and were fatally high. In fact, the one body, and we have to stress again, he was allocated the seat really below the recirc fan inlet area. That was the highest level. I think we're talking around about 66%. That is not a survivable level at all.
By following their checklist, the crew may have fed toxic gas into the passenger cabin.
And it might very well have been that most of your passengers were asphyxiated before impact.
No checklist for a 747 combi had ever foreseen the Helderberg's simultaneous problems, a cargo fire problem and a cabin smoke problem.
The smoke removal checklist is predicated on the assumption that the fire has been extinguished. In that event, descending to 14,000 feet and opening the cabin door would be the appropriate thing to do. It would get the smoke out of the airplane and enable people to breathe regular air. If the fire hasn't been extinguished, that would have the function of actually increasing the airflow to the fire and increasing the supply of oxygen to the fire. We think that's what happened in this case, that the fire had never been extinguished. And in fact, the crew's attempts to make the situation better may have in fact made the situation worse.
Investigators begin to realize that fighting a fire in the combi's cargo area is much more difficult than previously thought.
If there was a fire in one of these pallets, it was quite likely that by the time the crew was alerted to the fire, it would be too late.
Then the cabin instantly filled up with smoke.
But Van Zyl still doesn't know what caused such a fierce fire. How had the blaze started? And how had it brought the plane down? The answers are still deep under the ocean. It takes months to build the fiber optic cable that's long enough for the Gemini to reach the bottom of the sea and to modify the submarine for this mission.
We had to take the ROV, existing ROV that we had, which was designed for 6,000 feet, and we had to modify it so it would go to 20,000 feet.
Roy Truman's team had to give the sub thicker walls to withstand the enormous pressure it would encounter and modify its cameras for the extreme depth. On September the 23rd, 1988, the Gemini begins its record-breaking journey.
We were hesitant to say that everything would work because we didn't even have time to do sea trials on this, all of this new equipment.
The cable allows technicians at the surface to manipulate the Gemini at 4,400 meters. It also carries video signals from that remarkable depth. It's the first time that video images have been recorded from this deep in the Indian Ocean. Marine biologists are fascinated by the discovery of unique new species.
Some of the stuff that we saw on the seabed was pretty mind-blowing.
Then, 1 year to the day after it disappeared, the Helderberg is found. From a depth of 4,400 meters, the submarine sends back images that could only be the wreckage of South African Airways Flight 295.
There would be lots of luggage just strewn all over the seabed. Massive structures, the wings, tail, huge parts of the cabin split open, and you could see all of the ribs and the wiring, the hydraulic piping. I mean, it was incredible just to see everything that went into a machine spread over an area of about 5-6 square miles. It was incredible.
Van Zyl's expensive gamble is beginning to pay off. Descending to the Helderberg's wreckage is a triumph for him and his team. But just finding the debris isn't nearly enough. A year after the accident, Van Zyl is still hoping for the improbable, the recovery of the cockpit voice recorder.
One of the major aspects we aimed at in Operation Resolve was the recovery of the CVR. We really wanted to know whether the cabin crew reported to the captain that there was an explosion or what was happening at the back.
Hundreds of hours of videotape are recorded. It's exhausting work.
If you can imagine being on a football field with a flashlight that only illuminates a square foot of the football field, and you're looking for an earring one of the football players lost during the game in the dead of night. That's similar to what it's like when we're on the seabed.
Then, at 9 o'clock one morning, something catches the eye of one of the technicians.
Go back for a second. We might have passed.
At long last, the black box is discovered.
There, that's it. That's it right there. Michael, we found it. We found it.
That was a very fulfilling moment to know, fine, what we had aimed for, we have achieved, we're getting it.
It takes a full 5 hours for the Gemini to bring the black box up from the bottom of the sea. The South African media turns the discovery into front-page news. It's now 1989, and the apartheid government is still running the country with an iron fist. Van Zyl makes an unusual decision. He takes the sealed black box to Washington and opens it there.
Because otherwise I would have been accused of having covered up something or left something out or whatever. And we, the FAA and the NTSB guys, all listened to this tape at the same time for the first time.
Tension in the room is high. The cockpit voice recorder should be a tape of the last 30 minutes of the flight, as the crew fought the fire. But the tape turns out to be a major frustration. After a year on the bottom of the ocean, it's difficult to understand anything.
It was the worst time of my life, sitting in the playback room at the NTSB facilities, and you watch the time, and there is absolutely no indication of problems on the tape. And I'm watching the clock. At about 25 minutes, I was really getting very, very anxious.
For 28 minutes, the tape reveals nothing unusual. Then everything changes.
The next minute, of course, the alarm bell goes on the CVR, and we had about a minute's worth of relevant recording on the tape before the tape stopped.
Normally, the black box records the final moments of a flight, but not this time. Instead, investigators are able to listen to the start of the accident before the recording mysteriously stops. It's not what Van Zyl was hoping for, but it gives him crucial new insight into the fire.
Read out the fire checklist for us, please.
14 seconds after the fire alarm goes off, the plane's circuit breakers start to pop.
The breaker popped as well, huh? We'll check the breaker panel as well. Yeah.
Investigators estimate that up to 80 circuits were disabled. The wires to the cockpit voice recorder are destroyed only 81 seconds after the fire alarm first goes off. Van Zyl has not received the key evidence that he hoped for, but the fire is revealed as more violent than previously thought. The recording leaves many questions unanswered, but it does help Van Zyl to arrive at a personal opinion as to why the plane may have crashed.
A lot of things were happening in the cockpit, and we believe that he probably was faced to up to 80 circuit breakers popping in the cockpit at the time. May have made controlling of the aircraft extremely difficult. And the possibility then even of the airplane just gradually descending into the sea. Whether it was a controllable flight, I have my doubts.
I put myself in the cockpit on this thing, and I said, I would have been terrified. Heaviness, and just figuring out what do we do. Did they do the checklist correctly? We'll never know.
But investigators still don't know what triggered the Helderberg fire. The mystery can now only be solved by salvaging parts from the crashed plane.
We realized that what we had to do was just to continue recover as much wreckage as we could from the ocean floor.
Van Zyl's focus is on certain key pieces of the combi's cargo area. They're brought to a hangar and reassembled like a giant jigsaw puzzle. His plan is to reconstruct the section of the cargo area where the fire most likely started. Van Zyl discovers that the cargo area floor is untouched by fire.
So we know that the fire never burned lower than 1 meter off the cargo floor.
But the walls and ceiling at the front of the cargo area reveal severe fire damage. Van Zyl makes a dramatic discovery. The seat of the fire was on the front right pallet of the cargo.
So we were looking at a very localized fire on one pallet.
The front right pallet was mostly filled with computers, protected by polystyrene packaging. Investigators suspect that a fire within the pallet came in contact with the polystyrene packing material, producing gases which accumulated near the ceiling. When the gases became hot enough, they ignited into a flash fire that spread throughout the cargo hold.
Once smoke penetrated the polyethylene sheets, that fire would have been very, very hot.
But even if the packing material had helped spread the blaze, Van Zyl still didn't know why it started. After millions of dollars and more than a year and a half of work, he has to end his investigation.
I would have felt a lot better if we had been in a better position to give more factual information to the board to consider. But that was not to be. And we were not going to fabricate.
But interest in the wreck of the Helderberg doesn't die. Dark rumors circulate about a possible cause of the fire.
It's against this backdrop of a very repressive apartheid government. At that particular time, the first thought, I think, for many, many South Africans was what was on that plane. Was there something in that cargo hold that could have caused that terrible fire? Because planes don't just burst into flames mid-air and crash.
Then a South African government chemist makes a startling discovery, which leads to a controversial new theory. A microscopic iron particle on the nylon netting next to the pallet has a unique profile. The airflow patterns on the iron suggest that it traveled at a very high velocity while in a molten state. The discovery could mean that the fire on the Helderberg was not a flash fire triggered by packing materials.
This was a different kind of fire. This was a fire that had its own oxygen. If you can imagine something like a sparkler, which has fuel and its own oxygen, it was some kind of material similar to a sparkler that we feel was the cause of the fire.
A British fire and explosion analyst examines the exterior skin of the plane above the pallet and comes up with another piece of evidence to support the new theory. The skin on the outside of the plane reached temperatures as high as 300 degrees centigrade.
You must remember that it's very difficult to burn through an airplane skin in flight because the tremendous amount of cooling from the airflow on the outside of the skin.
Dr. David Klatzo is one of numerous experts who question what caused the fire.
It would have involved substances which normally would not have been carried aboard an aircraft, particularly a passenger aircraft. In other words, it could not have been a normal packing material, wood, cardboard, plastic fire. You don't carry the things of that nature which carry their own oxygen, which can produce an accelerated fire, for a number of reasons, one of which they are generally unstable. The second reason is that normal fire extinguishing methods will not put them out.
What could start such a fire? The only dangerous goods listed on the cargo manifest are computer batteries. Some believe the Helderberg must have been carrying cargo that wasn't listed. At the time, South Africa was under an international arms embargo. The country was also fighting a war with Angola.
South Africa didn't have capacity to do everything itself, and there were times when it had to buy from other countries. SAA was seen as a surrogate cargo carrier, that they could somehow, through its commercial airline use, also bring in substances for the South African government, undercover, under protection, no questions asked.
It was not that easy for them to fly a quasi-military airline into different countries and pick up military contraband, which you must remember we were laboring under an arms embargo at the time.
The media fuels the flames of suspicion that the government was using passenger jets to secretly import weapons. Armscor is the corporation responsible for supplying the South African forces with munitions.
At the time, there was a need to produce a better rocket system, a more efficient rocket system for dealing with the air menace in Angola. And the rocketry systems which are used for those purposes have as their propellant, a major component of the propellant is ammonium perchlorate. And that is what I believe was being carried aboard the Helderberg. But it is not the sort of compound you want on an aircraft when you are flying on that aircraft, because it is unstable, it is susceptible to self-ignition by any kind of vibration and violent movement.
The official investigation into the crash does not come to the conclusion that the Helderberg was carrying illegal arms. But the rumors won't go away. And more than 10 years after the crash, the dark theories force a very different South African government to take another look. The Helderberg accident revealed that the 747 Combi was vulnerable in the event of an onboard fire. South African Airways immediately stops using the 747 Combi. American officials take notice.
And the FAA went through and developed some new regulations, but for the weight and everything that was going to have to be added in there did not make it an economically feasible. And so essentially after the Helderberg accident, 747 Combis were not used anymore.
There are tributes and memorials to the 159 victims. But closure does not come easily for the families.
I need an answer for why I was orphaned at 14. And I feel that, as I say, I'm probably touching on hearsay, but there's a lot of evidence that does point to something not being right on that flight, and that the flight was carrying something illicit.
10 years after the Helderberg crash, the new South African government launches a commission to re-examine the accident.
The Truth Commission was tasked with basically uncovering the truth about apartheid atrocities, and one of the areas it was tasked to look at was the role of the SAA in sanctions busting during the 80s, and whether or not the Helderberg was a freak accident or not.
In 1998, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission makes a controversial conclusion. Namely, that nothing that was listed in the cargo manifest could have caused the fire.
And the Truth Commission recommended that there was something untoward about what had happened to the Helderberg.
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission exposed the improbabilities of the government version as to what had happened.
If nothing in the cargo inventory caused the fire, what did? And how did it get on board?
The reality, unfortunately, is unless somebody today comes up and says, yes, I did this, or yes, we were responsible for this, and you can prove them not to be involved in a hoax, that will be possibly the only time in which we will really know what had happened and caused and was the source of ignition of the fire.
In its final report, the Commission suggests that the Attorney General's office continue to investigate the accident.
But surprisingly, that has never happened. The ANC-led government hasn't pursued that. And of course, we have to ask ourselves why. And I think that the answer lies in what many people believe, is that it's just going to be too costly.
They don't want to open it for the simple reason that it will be financially disastrous for the airline.
Rennie van Zyl devoted years of his life to solving the mystery of the Helderberg. His inability to definitely prove the cause for the fire does not stop him from seeing the benefit of his investigation.
I believe that we as a team had done the best that we could under extreme challenging conditions and circumstances. What we had done had never been done before. It was pioneering work. The frustration is we could not establish the source of ignition, and we will probably never know.
I believe that those people are still out there that know exactly what happened to that aircraft. I know that their thought processes at the time were our country was at war and they were doing their duty for their country, But I just feel that they should have a heart for the families and bring out that information.
The first public demonstration of the world's most sophisticated passenger jet.
Okay, you're at 100 feet there.
100.
The Airbus A320 is being introduced to the world.
Mesdames et messieurs, votre attention s'il vous plaît. L'Airbus A320 arrive.
That introduction turns into a fatal calamity.
30. Can't be. 30.
It could not possibly have come at a worse time for Airbus. The crash was a major embarrassment.
There's enormous pressure on investigators. If Airbus is to survive, they must find the answer to one crucial question.
Was it the pilot or was it the plane?
It's 2:30 in the afternoon on June the 26th, 1988. An unusual charter flight prepares to depart Basel-Mulhouse Airport in France, near the Swiss border.
Anti-ice.
Captain Michel Asseline is one of Air France's most distinguished pilots.
On.
Though only 44, he's the head of pilot training for the company's newest plane, the Airbus A320. It's only the third of its kind to roll off the assembly line. Captain Asseline flew this very aircraft from the factory in Toulouse just 2 days earlier.
I was in charge of the launching of the 320 in Air France. The company used me to promote the aircraft. The speeches to make, I was constantly on the television, on newspaper.
Air Charter 296 would like to roll, please.
Asseline's first officer, Pierre Mazière, is also a senior Air France pilot.
Air Charter 296.
He's invited 2 off-duty flight attendants to come along for the ride on this special flight. The aircraft is booked to perform a low-altitude flyover at a local air show. There are 130 people on board this A320, which is unusual for an air show demonstration flight. They have no luggage. For some, it's their first time on an airplane. There are even children, like 7-year-old Mariama Bari, unaccompanied by their parents. After the flyover, they will be taken on a sightseeing tour around Mont Blanc, the highest peak in Western Europe. Most got their tickets as promotional gifts from a local bank and newspaper. Jean-Marie Schreiber is a young reporter covering the launch of the new plane.
As a journalist, I was thrilled to be on the flight, to have a chance to see how people reacted inside the plane.
Another journalist aboard, Jean-Claude Bosch, has been busy recording the event.
As I got on the plane, I thought, great, this is going to be an unforgettable experience. And it really was unforgettable.
The A320 is the first civil aircraft to use fly-by-wire, a cutting-edge technology that computerizes flight controls. The system had previously mainly been used by the military.
On the fly-by-wire system, the pilot essentially flies the computer, and the computer flies the aircraft.
Fly-by-wire alters the relationship between pilot and plane. It gives computers the ability to override human inputs to prevent pilot error. The A320's flight computer won't let its human operators do anything it determines to be dangerous. Airbus has become the first civil aircraft maker to embrace this technology. It hopes this will give it an edge over its longtime American rival, Boeing. In its first public presentation, Airbus has a lot on the line.
Okay, tell me what you want in terms of speed and altitude.
Okay, then take off, right turn. We go nice and easy to find out things.
We tried to demonstrate the capability of this aircraft. To say we wanted to show off, not exactly. We wanted to make a good job, and we were sure to make a good job.
Once we identify the airfield, we extend flaps to 3. We'll do the flyover at 100, landing gear out, and you just leave it up to me. I'll give it Alpha Max. Done it 20 times.
Okay.
Captain Asseline is planning a breathtaking maneuver. A low-altitude, nose-high flyby at Alpha Max. This is the slowest a plane can fly without stalling.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello, and welcome aboard this Airbus A320, which was put into service just 2 days ago. We will soon be taking off for a short sightseeing flight, which will start from the Absheim Flying Club, and then we'll be flying around Mont Blanc. I wish you a very pleasant flight. That's done.
ACF 296Q, clear for takeoff. Runway 16.
We're rolling. Take off. Go.
Parameters normal.
100. 100.
It's already requesting climb. You see that?
Yes, that happens. I know the bug.
V1. Rotate. Gear up, flaps 1. After takeoff checklist completed.
It's only a 5-minute flight to Habsheim Airfield, where the airshow is being held. For this sleepy Alsatian town, the airshow is the highlight of the summer.
The airshow drew more than 5,000 people. There was significant interest from the public.
The airfield is so small, its coordinates aren't stored in the plane's navigation database, so the pilots must find it by sight.
You're at 8 nautical miles. You'll soon see it. There's the highway.
We leave the highway to the left, don't we? No, to the right of the highway.
It's slightly to the right of the highway.
There's the airfield. You've got it, have you?
The pilots have spotted the airfield late. They will have to hurry to descend to the planned altitude for the flyover at the airshow. A crowd is forming at the runway.
Air Charter 296, good afternoon.
Absheim, hello. We're coming into view of the airfield for the flyover.
Yes, I can see you. You're cleared. The sky's clear.
Gear down.
Okay, we're going in for low altitude, low speed flyover. 296. Roger.
Flaps 2.
Quebec November Hotel, Absheim, Fox Echo 984.
Okay. 984. Put in 984. Flaps 3.
Flaps 3.
That's the airfield. You confirm?
Affirmative.
Flight 296 makes a gentle turn to line up with the runway. The pilots must now lose more altitude and speed to get into position for the flyover.
200. 200. Mesdames et messieurs, votre attention s'il vous plaît. L'Airbus A320 arrive.
Okay, you're at 100 feet there.
100.
Watch it. Watch it.
The aircraft is now at the planned altitude. For Asseline, this will be the most delicate part of the maneuver. He must keep the plane in a stable position with the nose up, but not too high.
I looked at the ground and said, look, he's not high enough, because you could see the grass right out your window.
Okay, I'm okay there. Disconnect auto throttle.
He disables one of the plane's safety features so that the computer won't speed up the slow-moving plane. Only now, Captain Asseline sees a danger that threatens the lives of everyone on board. The A320's low-speed flyover at the Habsheim airfield is suddenly not going according to plan. There's a forest in the path of Captain Asseline's plane.
30.
Take off, go around power.
He selects the highest thrust setting and pulls back on the controls, expecting the aircraft to pull up. But the plane keeps dropping.
Can't be.
J'ai commencé à voir par le hublot des branches d'arbres.
I started to see through the window tree branches. I was astonished. You can imagine being on a trail in a large vehicle, a bumpy trail, driving at 80 or 100 kilometers an hour, and you're shaking from all sides. It was like that. I was saying to myself, the plane has to stay in one piece, because if the plane stays whole, we'll be okay. If it breaks up, we're done for.
S'il casse, c'est fichu.
Still full of fuel, the right wing of the jet is sheared off. The fuel ignites immediately on impact.
We stopped very quickly. And on the ground, I broke my seat, just because I was holding very firmly. I broke my seat, and I could see a lot of flames all over, but about 20 meter high flames around the cockpit, smoke coming from everywhere.
The first officer is badly injured.
And he has a lot of blood, and even with the full harness, he hit something in front of him.
What the hell have you done?
I don't know. I don't understand.
There was a moment of silence when the plane finally stopped.
Incredibly, the fuselage is still in one piece. Everyone has survived the impact, but they're not out of danger yet.
So I lean to the right, and I see red flames. The windows were red. And I think, we held together, but we're going to burn to death.
Then we heard somebody say, get out, there's a fire.
Sortez, sortez, il y a le feu.
Evacuate the aircraft. Hurry, I'll deal with him.
Only 2 exits can be used for evacuation. The rest are engulfed in flames. But thick branches block one of the doors, making evacuation difficult. In the chaos of the cabin, some passengers struggle with their seatbelts. Marie-Françoise Froche is one of the last passengers to leave her seat. She comes across Mariama Barry, who's trapped in her seat.
Mariama
Barry, she was 7, 8. After the accident, people pushing toward the exit pushed on the backs of the seats, the backs that folded over her, and then she was trapped by her seatbelt. No one saw her. She was forgotten. But it's too late. Both are overcome by smoke before they can get off the plane. In the cockpit, Captain Asseline struggles to get his injured first officer out of the burning aircraft.
I took him from his seat and belt him, carried it, I don't know how, and I put it in a slide. When the passenger, all of them, the last one, was out of the plane, I saw my crew. They told me, Captain, they are all out. I couldn't believe it.
But the crew is wrong. Not all the passengers have made it out. Marie-Françoise Froche, Mariama Bari, and another young boy are dead. In addition to the tragic loss of life, the accident is a PR disaster for Airbus.
The crash could not possibly have come at a worse time for Airbus. They were trying out this new concept, which they had touted very widely as a new level of safety for civil flight. And here's a pilot going and crashing one. For those who actually saw the accident, and it was broadcast on the news media throughout the world the same evening that it happened, there was amazement. The crash was a major embarrassment.
Investigators from France's Accident Investigation Bureau are on the scene of the crash within hours. They need to know why this demonstration flight ended in disaster. They recover the plane's data and voice recorders. Claude Béchet will head the investigation.
Was it the pilot or was it the plane? We need to know.
Like the pilots of Flight 296, he also works for Air France as an airline captain.
Let's get to work.
Which is unusual for a state investigator.
At that time, I was still an airline pilot, and I was in New York when the accident happened, and they sent me a telegram to ask me to come back to Paris as soon as possible.
Apart from the flight recorders, investigators have a remarkable piece of evidence to consider. A high-quality video of the accident has been recorded by a French cameraman.
It was the first time we had a video of an accident, you know. Normally, an accident happens in the middle of nowhere. Nobody is there with a camera to film it.
The tape clearly shows the plane flying right at the trees at the end of the runway. It doesn't seem to be climbing at all. The cockpit voice recorder offers a confounding clue.
Take off, go around power.
30. 30.
Get me!
It's clear the crew had no idea there was an obstacle at the end of the runway. Investigators are puzzled. How could a forest take a pilot by surprise? Béchet brings Captain Asselineau in for questioning about the flyover at Habsheim. They need to know what his plan was.
My intention was to carry out a flyover at slow speed.
As a qualified A320 pilot, Claude Béchet is familiar with the plane's capabilities.
Over the airstrip, and we go to Alpha Max.
Very good.
He sees nothing wrong with Captain Asselineau's plan.
It was not bad. Making a slow pass was well planned. And he seemed to me to be very open and very ready to help to work with the investigation commission.
Investigators turn their attention to how Air France prepared the flight crew for the airshow. They discover a memo setting out the rules for all airshow flights. What draws the attention of investigators is the minimum altitude Air France had selected for airshow flyovers: 100 feet. It was in violation of national regulations.
He should have been at 500 feet, as a matter of fact. But there had at that time a tendency for pilots who were making air shows like that to go a little bit lower and sometimes much lower.
Chief Investigator Claude Béchet now wonders if there were any other mistakes in the planning of the flight. He soon learns that Air France's flight division didn't start drawing up a flight plan for the demonstration until less than 48 hours before the air show. An Air France employee had prepared maps of the airfield for the crew of Flight 296. Investigators find a serious problem. The forest around Habsheim Airfield did not show up on the photocopies. The employee who had put together the flight package didn't have an opportunity to discuss it with the crew.
You were using a navigation chart?
While questioning Asseline, Bechet discovers that the pilots were also given little time to prepare.
Happened then. Here's the flight package. Thanks.
That's highly unusual for an air show.
My co-pilot told me, okay, we make a flight around Mont Blanc, and then we have to make 2 low pass of a small airport, Habsheim. Told me there is nothing special. So for me, it was a normal flight, a normal day.
That preparation had not been complete, and there had been no briefing of the crew by the staff.
Investigators then make an intriguing discovery at the crash site. They measure the height of the trees hit by Flight 296. They discover the average height of the forest to be only 40 feet. This poses an urgent question. How could an Airbus that was supposed to be flying at 100 feet hit trees less than half that height? It is clear to investigators that Flight 296 fatally deviated from its original flight plan, losing altitude before plunging into a forest. But only the black box data can help them understand how and why this had happened. Information from the A320's flight data recorder is recovered within hours of the crash. The device records information about 200 aircraft functions. It paints a detailed picture of how Flight 296 was operating in the final minutes of its journey.
Can be! We could reconstruct the entire accident. We could live with the crew as the accident was happening.
Investigators make 2 striking observations from the data. The first is that Flight 296 suffered no mechanical breakdowns. The second is that the A320 followed a very different flight path than the one Captain Asseline had planned. Instead of maintaining a stable airspeed and altitude, Flight 296 had slowed down and lost altitude as it performed the flyover. As the A320 crossed the Habsheim airfield, its speed dropped to only 112 knots. That's about as slow as an A320 can fly. The plane's deceleration was so dramatic, it was even visible on the video. Michel Asseline was one of Air France's top pilots. Claude Bechet is hard-pressed to understand how he could have mishandled such a high-profile flight. Pressed further, Asseline explains how the trouble started.
You were using a navigation chart?
Yes, we had some difficulty locating the airfield. We leave the highway to the left, don't we? No, to the right of the highway.
It's slightly to the right of the highway.
There's the airfield. You've got it, have you?
They spotted the airfield too late. So when they did, they reduced the power and they descended.
So they rushed their descent in order to get into position for the flyover.
And they were still slowing down when they reached the airfield.
That's the airfield. You confirm?
Affirmative.
But then another problem emerged. The spectators were lined up on a different runway from the one the crew was heading for. The crew of Air France Flight 296 is ill-prepared for their demonstration flight. In planning for the air show, Air France only provided the crew with information for runway 2, Habsheim's only paved airstrip. But Captain Assouline sees the crowds aligned on a much shorter, adjacent grass field.
I was expecting a normal runway. At the latest moment, I saw that it was a grass runway.
Captain Assouline lined up with the grass strip.
I had no idea that at the end of the runway was a forest. For me, it was bushes only or something.
Okay, you're at 100 feet there. Watch it. Watch it.
Because they had to rush their descent, by the time Flight 296 got to the airfield, it was flying too fast. To lose speed, Captain Assouline kept the thrust on its lowest power setting, well below the setting pilots normally use for Alpha Max flight. But another serious problem was developing. The aircraft had dropped below 100 feet and was continuing to fall. And the crew didn't seem to notice.
I'm okay there. Disconnect auto throttle.
In a matter of seconds, the altitude had fallen to only 30 feet.
What was extremely clear is that airplane was flying at approximately 30 feet above the ground. Regardless of any other data, this data was extremely important.
Take off, go around power.
No airplane of that size or of any other size should make a flight path that low.
The data is clear. You were at 30 feet, not 100.
I believed I was at 100 feet.
Claude Béchet is still uncertain how the A320 ended up so dangerously close to the ground. Captain Assouline insists his instruments failed him.
Flaps 2.
Quebec November Hotel at same Fox Echo 984.
Okay. 984.
Captain Assouline was relying on his barometric altimeter. It uses air pressure to measure the plane's distance from the ground. It had to be set to local atmospheric pressure to be accurate.
Quebec November Hotel at same Fox Echo 984.
Okay. 984. Put in 9.
The cockpit recorder proves that the tower provided the pressure reading and the crew set their instrument. But Assouline insists the altimeter was giving him a false reading.
I tell you, the altimeter said the plane was at 100 feet.
Michel Assouline stated that the barometric altimeter was, in fact, to be precise, 67 feet out. And that is something that he claims led him to be flying at 30 feet instead of at 100 feet.
Investigators are skeptical. Assouline had more than one instrument to give him altitude information. The A320 has a second altimeter that uses radio waves to calculate the plane's distance from the ground. That altimeter displays the altitude on a digital display. But Captain Assouline claims it was difficult to read.
We could not use the radio altimeter because this radio altimeter is digital and nobody can fly by reading numbers. I tried that later on a simulator. I never succeed to do it.
But the radio altimeter has another way of alerting pilots.
I'm okay there.
50.
A digital voice call-out.
Disconnect auto throttle.
But Assouline claims he and his first officer, Pierre Mazière, could not hear it.
Some people say, but you could have heard the radio altimeter saying 30, 30, 50, 40, 30. No, because at that time this aircraft was very, very noisy. And we have the headsets. And we have demonstrated at that time that the radio altimeter warnings or the radio altimeter call-outs, they were not going through the headset.
50.
Despite Assouline's defense, investigators are certain that the crew of Flight 296 mishandled a risky maneuver. Béchet has more questions for Captain Assouline.
What did you do when you saw the trees?
I did what any pilot would do. I tried to climb over them.
Investigators learn that in the final moments before the crash,
30.
Take off, go around power.
Captain Assouline applied full throttle.
When I was waiting for the engine to spool up, that I realized in front of me there were trees, and I was waiting. waiting.
But he claims the engines did not respond. And when they finally kicked in, it was too late.
I tell you, the engines did not come on when I gave it full throttle.
Captain Asseline's testimony raises a troubling prospect. If there was a prolonged delay in engine response, it could indicate a critical problem with the A320's turbojets. Captain Asseline is convinced the engines didn't respond quickly enough in the final seconds of the flight. He makes it his mission to prove it. He uncovers an Airbus document warning of a defect on the A320. It says the plane's engine speed could stagnate at low altitude, a condition caused by poor airflow. When this occurs, the engine cannot accelerate. But investigators can find no evidence of such a failure in any of the data from the plane. In the 5 seconds after Captain Asseline applied full power on the thrust levers, the A320's twin engines had begun to spool up. They reached 84% thrust, close to full power, just before the plane hit the trees.
When you put from idle to full power, you have the impression that nothing happens for a few seconds, and then the power comes. But that was normal, exactly as predicted by the certification.
Investigators are increasingly certain the engines on Flight 296 didn't fail. They find a novel way to verify the data. Video of the crash picked up the distinctive sound of the A320's engines accelerating. By studying that sound, engineers can determine how much power the engines were generating in the final seconds before the crash.
We were able to compare the RPM of the engines from that film and from the flight data recorder. There was nothing wrong with the engines, any of the two engines.
Why? Chief Investigator Claude Béchet has a new headache. Captain Asseline is convinced there is a conspiracy against him. He cuts off all cooperation with the investigation.
Very well.
Investigation committee, I tried to cooperate with them, but I began to be suspicious. And the press, each week, the aircraft is good, the aircraft has nothing, pilot error. All that was a big cover-up, my opinion.
Captain Asseline begins a campaign to challenge the French investigation. He appears on British television to make a dramatic assertion.
When I pull the stick to up position, the flight controls, the elevator control go to down position. So on any aircraft, if you ask up, following the order of the pilots, the elevator control goes to up. And not that on that one, it went to down. Why? That will be the good question.
His accusations go to the heart of doubts about the aircraft. That Airbus fly-by-wire system had given the A320's computers too much control. Asseline's claim that the plane didn't follow his instructions is supported by data from the plane's flight recorder. The black box recorded every movement of the pilot's side stick controller. It does show that seconds before the crash, Captain Asseline pulled it back to get the plane's nose up. Investigators compare it with what the plane did in response. They make a perplexing discovery.
He's telling the truth. The elevator moved down.
In the final seconds before the accident, the pilots had desperately tried to pull up. The side stick controls the plane's elevator. Pulling back on it should raise the elevator and pitch the plane upwards.
30.
But that's not what happened on this flight.
One of the strange things about the crash flight, which became apparent when the digital flight recorder was analysed, was that during the last few seconds prior to contact with the trees, the pilot was dragging back on the stick as hard as he could, but the flight surfaces were moving into a position to put the nose down.
Captain Asseline believes the plane's descent triggered an automatic response by the flight computers. Asseline inadvertently brought his plane to within 30 feet of the ground with his landing gear down and his flaps extended. Investigators now wonder if the plane's computer determined that Asseline was landing and initiated the necessary steps to accomplish that.
As the plane leveled up with the airfield, it overflew a little copse of trees, which took the radar altitude momentarily below 30 feet. That would have been sufficient to trigger the flight control system to enter landing mode.
It's possible that in spite of what Captain Asseline was commanding the plane to do, the computer brought the plane's nose down for landing. Investigators must try to determine whether the A320 overrode its pilot at a critical moment. They analyze the data from the flight recorder.
Stop it there.
But to their disappointment...
So was the plane in landing mode or not?
The flight data recorder can't confirm if the plane went into landing mode. The A320 systems are so advanced that the recorder can't track all of the plane's functions. Investigator Claude Béchet comes up with another way to find out. He replicates Asseline's approach to the Habsheim airfield to see how the A320 responds.
Okay, let's start the descent. Power to flight idle. Now put it into Alpha Max. That's it. Gently.
I replayed the accident, but on the longest runway in Toulouse.
Altitude, 40 feet, 35 feet.
We replayed the accident exactly what it was.
Béchet's plan is to descend to 30 feet, as Asseline's A320 did.
Now pull up slightly to level off. Hold it there.
Béchet wants to see if the flight computer puts the plane in landing mode.
Okay, now full thrust. Did you feel that? Alpha protection.
The test flight has triggered a nose-down response from the plane's computers, like the crash of Flight 296. But the plane hadn't gone into landing mode. Instead, the flyover had activated one of the A320's main safety features: stall protection. Due to a lack of airflow over the wings, flying slowly in a nose-high position can cause a plane to lose lift. The A320's computer has been programmed to bring the plane's nose down when it gets close to stalling.
This means that in theory, as long as the flight control system is in operation, the pilot cannot stall the plane.
Béchet concludes the flight computers did override Captain Asseline's command. But he believes that by doing so, it had prevented the plane from stalling and crashing just short of the tree line.
That airplane didn't stall and, let's say, landed on the trees.
The investigation into the crash at Habsheim is coming to an end. Claude Béchet prepares to deliver his verdict.
The conclusion of my report was that the airplane was too low, too slow, and with not enough power.
As far as Claude Béchet is concerned, the report is the final word on the Habsheim tragedy. The case, however, is far from over. The French justice system is moving towards a judgment of Captain Asselineau. He is charged with involuntary homicide in the deaths of 3 passengers and faces the prospect of a long prison sentence. But Captain Asselineau believes he has found evidence that will exonerate him. He is convinced there was a conspiracy to tamper with the plane's black boxes, to conceal problems with the A320's fly-by-wire technology.
There has been a cover-up with some funny recorders. That's the first point. The second point, they have been changing the content of the recorders.
It all begins, according to Asselineau, at the crash site. An employee of France's Civil Aviation Authority is photographed carrying the A320's flight recorders from the scene. Those same black boxes are presented as evidence at Asselineau's trial. But inexplicably, they look different.
I had a chance to see the black boxes held by the court. But when I see the state they're in, they're old boxes, full of scratches, dusty, with chipped paint. I think, wait, these can't be the boxes from the crash. The plane was new. They're not the right ones.
Captain Asselineau hires a Swiss criminology institute to compare the 2 photographs. Its conclusion: they're not the same flight recorders. Captain Michel Asselineau claims the black box data from his flight has been tampered with. But investigator Claude Béchet rejects the accusations as outrageous.
They were trying to prove that the tapes had been tampered with, which we could not understand, because every recorder expert knew that it was physically impossible.
But there is one expert who believes the black boxes are suspicious. Ray Davis is a former head of flight recorder analysis at Britain's Air Accidents Investigation Branch. He has been hired by British television to review the French investigators' work.
It was a little bit of an eye-opener in a way, in that prior to reading the report, I had a totally different impression of the possible causes of this accident, whereas when I read the report, there were so many anomalies and questions raised by the report that my whole attitude towards the accident changed completely.
Davis discovers evidence that could vindicate Asselineau. It raises questions about when the crew applied power to try to overfly the trees.
30.
Take off, go around power.
30.
While studying the black box data, Davis comes across a curious inconsistency. French investigators had synchronized the black boxes with a transcript of air traffic control communications. Davis examines the last conversation the pilots had with the tower before the crash.
984. Okay, 984, put in 984.
It was recorded by both air traffic control and the plane's own black box.
Quebec November Hotel at same Fox Echo 984. Quebec November Hotel at same Fox Echo 984.
Ray Davis discovers a time discrepancy between the 2 recordings, amounting to a loss of several seconds. According to the black box data, the aircraft was 5 seconds from impact with the trees when Captain Asselineau commanded full thrust from the engines. But according to Ray Davis's analysis, this actually took place 4 seconds earlier. This 4-second gap dramatically changes the calculus of the accident. It's the difference between a normal delay in engine response and a serious malfunction.
Asselineau claims that on this particular occasion, the delay was more than he expected. And depending upon which side of the argument you come down at as to whether or not the 4-second delay in the digital flight data recording was real or not, then, you know, he's either an idiot or he's right.
The French justice system does not believe that Asselineau is right. After multiple appeals, Michel Asselineau is convicted of involuntary homicide and sentenced to 10 months in prison. Still, the controversy over the black boxes and the missing 4 seconds lingers on. It promises to forever cloud the results of Claude Béchet's investigation.
The public opinion thought probably, oh, well, there was so much at stake, you know. It was the future of all European aviation industry, which was at stake. So they managed to tamper the tapes so they could blame the pilot and not the airplane. But this is just impossible.
The investigation into the Habsheim accident made several recommendations. It calls for passengers to be banned on all demonstration flights. It also calls for better reconnaissance of airfields by flight crews. And they want airline procedures to be reviewed to ensure they conform with official regulations concerning altitude. Michel Asselineau went on to a career as a teacher and inventor in the aviation industry. He continues to appeal his conviction and has devoted much of his life to clearing his name. The tragedy at Habsheim would have little impact on Airbus industry. The A320 would go on to become one of the most successful commercial aircraft in history, selling over 750 planes in its first 10 years. And fly-by-wire technology would be safely adopted by a new generation of passenger aircraft.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent towards Amsterdam Schiphol Airport.
Thank you.
Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 is preparing to land in Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250.
The crew is flying a state-of-the-art Boeing 737.
Flaps 15.
Localizer alive, localizer capture.
In the final moments of the flight, the landing turns into a catastrophe. The plane falls like a rock. The crash of Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 involves the most popular plane on Earth. With nearly 1.5 million passengers boarding 737s every day, investigators need to figure out if the problem was with the plane or with the pilots flying it.
Mayday, Mayday.
On the morning of February the 25th, 2009, Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 becomes the first plane to crash at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport in more than 10 years.
It smashed into the ground really hard. It made a tremendous noise.
The plane hits the ground in a muddy field just north of runway 18 right. Since the crash was so close to the airport, rescue workers arrive quickly. Most of the passengers have survived, but many are badly injured. Survivors are taken straight to local hospitals. Images of the Amsterdam accident quickly spread around the world. This is the third crash of a passenger jet in the past 6 weeks. The sudden nature of this accident adds to the mystery. It doesn't take long for the Dutch safety board to arrive at the scene. They will be investigating this accident, but they won't be alone. The crash involved an American-made plane, so the US National Transportation Safety Board sends Joe Sador, one of its most experienced investigators, to Amsterdam.
When it's a non-US registered aircraft that crashes overseas, such as this Turkish Airlines, we are the state of manufacture and design of the airframe, and also in this case the engines.
Fuselage in 3 large pieces, engines forward of the main wreck site.
Flight 1951 was one of the most advanced aircraft in the skies, the Boeing 737-800 series. It's designed to travel longer routes at higher altitudes.
The new generation 737 is still the best airplane Boeing ever built. We developed an airplane that had an improved wing, improved avionics, simpler systems that required less maintenance.
Investigators know this isn't just any plane. The 737 is the world's best-selling commercial jet. Finding out why this one crashed is imperative. There are more than 5,000 of them in the skies. They carry about 1.5 million passengers a day. Investigators must quickly determine if there's a flaw with the plane that could cause another accident. What they know so far is that Flight 1951 had been traveling from Istanbul, Turkey, to Amsterdam. There were 128 passengers on board the early morning flight, including 4 engineers from Boeing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent towards Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. Please raise your seatbacks to the upright position and stow away your tray tables.
There was no mention on board of any kind of trouble in the cockpit. The crash has killed 9 people, including 3 members of the Boeing team and the pilots in the cockpit.
See if you can get me some aerials of the crash site.
There are eerie similarities to another recent accident involving a Boeing aircraft. British Airways Flight 38.
Approximately a year before this, there had been a 777 short landing at Heathrow, which had a dual-engine flameout.
In that accident, a Boeing 777 fell to the ground short of the runway. The British Airways pilots reported that both their engines stopped delivering power just before landing. At the time of the Turkish Airways crash, the cause of that accident hasn't been found. Like in that case, investigators have plenty of clues to work with. The plane and its engines are largely intact. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder are found in good condition. There are also plenty of survivors to describe what happened. According to the passengers, the landing had been routine, but then suddenly the plane simply dropped out of the sky and hit the ground. But perhaps the biggest clue comes from the crash site itself. The wreckage is not spread out. It tells investigators that the plane could not have been traveling forward at high speed when it hit the ground.
The way the aircraft had crashed, it did appear to be some sort of a landing accident in which there was moderate control of some sort.
The pattern of debris and the passenger reports point investigators to an immediate suspect: the engines.
The engines issue was a very big issue in my thought process at the time, initially.
There's no evidence of fire on the fuselage. In many crashes, fuel in the plane's tanks ignites on impact. The lack of fire raises an obvious question. Did the engines stop running because Flight 1951 had simply run out of gas?
That was one of the first thoughts that I had was, did this airplane have fuel aboard? Because otherwise, how does a 737 literally fall out of the sky on approach to an airport?
But the location and condition of the plane's engines suggest that perhaps they didn't quit in flight.
Sure looks like it was running.
When we first looked at where the engines ended up, the initial impression was that they probably were producing thrust at impact, given that they were so far forward of the main wreckage. That was just a very general conclusion.
Only the flight data recorder can tell investigators how much power the engines were generating in the seconds before the crash.
Lots of fuel. Rules that out.
It doesn't take long to discover that there was plenty of fuel in the plane's tanks. Flight 1951 definitely did not run out of gas. Passengers report that in the final seconds before the crash, the plane hit what felt like turbulence. It points investigators to a well-known culprit, a microburst. A microburst is a powerful column of air that shoots out of storm clouds. It can literally slam a low-flying plane to the ground.
If an airplane flies into that at approach speeds, you're not going to be flying anymore. You're going to come out of the sky. Certainly, it was one of the things that all of us took a look at the beginning. Was there a microburst?
In 1985, a Delta Airlines flight was caught in a microburst while landing at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. The plane hit the ground short of the runway. 137 people were killed. Investigators learned that there were heavy clouds above the airport at the time of the accident. A powerful gust of wind may well have accompanied them. The flight data recorder will have recorded wind speeds outside the plane. Investigators will need to analyze the flight data to prove the microburst theory. In the meantime, the rescue has led to an unusual discovery.
There was 3 pilots in the cockpit, which is unusual. This is a 2-crew cockpit. So why was that 3rd pilot there?
Since none of the 3 pilots survived the accident, it's all the more urgent for investigators to retrieve the data from the cockpit voice recorder. It records conversations in the cockpit. They're in luck.
Because of the way that the aircraft crashed, access to the recorders and the condition of the recorders was excellent.
The reason for the 3rd pilot is soon uncovered.
Flying standard arrival route, visibility 3,500 meters, expected to decrease to 2,500 meters.
For First Officer Murat Sezer, this had been a training flight of sorts. He was new to the airline and was being shown the intricacies of landing at Amsterdam's airport.
In the Jepson charts, which is what all pilots use to navigate to and from Schiphol, there's 102 pages of information on Schiphol alone. So there's dozens of approaches.
Runway 18 right has 3 high-speed exits to the left.
The captain, Hassan Arisan, was doing double duty. He was training his first officer.
Make small corrections as we get close to the runway.
And was in command of Flight 1951. It's because Captain Arisan was teaching that there was the 3rd pilot in the cockpit. Olgay Ozgur was a safety pilot. He was there to keep an eye on the flight's progress during this training mission.
The purpose of that 2nd set of eyes is to make sure that the captain and the first officer, if they're in a situation where it's a little bit of a training portion of the flight, that they don't miss something.
We got a clean recording?
The voice recorder reveals that the 3 crew members began preparations for landing when still above 8,500 feet.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250.
But the voice recorder has picked up an unusual sound, a warning that makes no sense at this stage of the flight.
One of the investigators from Boeing was a engineering pilot that came and helped with the CDR. And he's listening to see when, or are there any unusual sounds that can be heard that would not be normal.
Speed okay for ILS 18 right.
Descent to 4,000, ILS 18 right.
The alarm keeps sounding. It's the landing gear configuration warning horn. Captain Arisan continually dismisses it.
Turkish 1951, descent 4,000, ILS 18 right. Landing gear.
Is that the landing gear warning? They're at 8,300 feet here.
The warning is a solid clue, but investigators can't yet see how it could possibly have caused a crash. The crew of Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 got warnings to extend their landing gear while still thousands of feet in the air.
On the initial listen, We heard a gear warning horn occur as the aircraft was approaching, when it was still up and it was coming in about 10,000 feet and below.
Investigators now turn to the flight data recorder to help solve some of the mystery surrounding this flight. The analysis of wind speeds outside the aircraft is completed. It's clear, none are drastic enough to have brought down the plane.
Evidence of a microburst.
But the flight data recorder does provide some valuable insight into the cause of the landing gear warning. One of the instruments that measures altitude had the plane already on the ground.
When we looked and saw the radio altimeter data, on the recorder it showed about 8,000 feet, and then immediately it went down to about -8. -8 feet is an indication that the aircraft's on the ground, but of course it's still at 2,000 feet.
The Boeing 737 is equipped with two separate altimeters. One measures air pressure to determine the plane's height above sea level. That reading is displayed prominently in the cockpit on both pilots' flight display.
0, set, sir.
The plane is also equipped with a radio altimeter. It's made up of 4 antennas. 2 transmit signals to the ground, and 2 others read the signal that bounces back to determine the plane's height.
It's precise. It's very, very precise. Pressure altimeters can sometimes be not as accurate, and radar altimeters are 100% accurate if they're working properly.
One antenna feeds the reading to the first officer's display. The other feeds the captain's instruments. In the case of Flight 1951, the captain's side was wrong most of the flight. Investigators go back over the CVR and make a puzzling discovery.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250. Radio altimeter.
Captain Arasan seems to have known that the landing gear warning was being caused by a faulty radio altimeter.
The airplane thought that it was low to the ground and the gear was not down. And the captain recognized that the problem was really in the radio altimeter, showing him that they should be on the ground, and he goes, it's just the radio altimeter.
Throughout much of the approach, the captain's radio altimeter had been displaying a reading of -8 feet, triggering the warning to lower the gear.
They treated it like it was a nuisance.
Turkish 1951.
Descend to 2,000.
2,000, 1951.
Investigators dig for any other abnormalities. They learn that with Flight 1951 still about 17 kilometers from the airport, controllers directed the pilots to begin their final turn to line up with the runway.
Turkish 1951, left heading
210, cleared approach.
18 right.
Left 210, cleared ILS, Turkish 1951.
210, set, sir.
This turn puts Flight 1951 in line with runway 18 right. It's equipped with an instrument landing system, which sends out a signal outlining the ideal descent path to the foot of the runway. The autopilot follows that glide path until the plane is a few hundred feet from the ground. Then the pilot takes over. It makes landing almost effortless.
The ILS is pretty easy to follow. It's a video game. My daughter has flown in a simulator and can land a 737 using the ILS.
The crew begins configuring their plane for landing, unfazed by the warning horn that's repeatedly triggered by the malfunctioning radio altimeter.
Flaps 15.
10 kilometers out, Flight 1951 picks up the ILS signal that will guide the plane to the runway.
Localizer alive. Localizer capture.
The safety pilot, Olgay Ojgur, now reminds Captain Arasan about the failed altimeter.
We have radio altimeter failure, sir.
Okay.
Turkish 1951.
Runway 18 right. Clear to land.
Clear to land, thank you.
Investigators are stumped. The crew knew about the malfunction and continued their approach. How had it then caused them to crash? Clearly, there was more to this accident than a faulty altimeter.
The whole premise of airline safety, the way we build the airplanes, the way we fly them, is based on the idea that we can have any number of failures and we should still be able to arrive safely. The radio altimeter is just one instrument. There's no way in the world that that one instrument, if it fails, should be a major cause of worry that we're going to have a crash.
Investigators wonder if the crew had been given proper guidance for their approach. They turn to exchanges between the pilots and the controller who guided them in. They carefully review every instruction.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4,000. Speed okay for ILS 18, right. Turkish 1951, descend to 2,000. Turkish 1951, left heading 210, cleared approach 18, right.
By following the controller's instructions, the crew made their final turn much too close to the runway.
So to intercept properly, they should be here.
International guidelines call for approaching planes to intercept the signal that guides them to the runway from below. It's so pilots don't have to make any drastic last-minute course corrections to get to it.
To intercept here, they had to descend.
But Flight 1951 was given instructions that brought it to the threshold of the glide slope while still way above it. It's a common practice at Schiphol because it gets planes to the runway faster.
Because they were so close, they had to capture the glide slope from above. Although it is an unusual situation, it is one that can be handled by a flight crew if it is managed properly.
Approaching a glide slope from above is more difficult, mostly because the crew has to suddenly slow the plane and descend rapidly to intercept the signal.
We also call this a slam dunk approach, and some pilots like it, some pilots don't. It's a little bit harder, and things happen quicker when you're above the glide path trying to intercept from above, and it's just a challenge for a lot of pilots.
The approach from above increased the crew's workload, but it's standard practice at Schiphol Airport.
I've flown into Schiphol dozens of times, and I expect it.
If the controller's instructions had somehow overtaxed this crew, their conversations would indicate it. They're just 5 kilometers from the runway.
1,000.
Check.
Flaps 40. Speed brake.
Speed brake armed. Green light.
One thing at a time. Landing gear.
Gear down. 3 green.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
500.
All lights on.
Please warn the cabin crew.
Cabin crew, take your seats.
Then, real trouble. A stall warning.
Speed, sir.
I have control.
100 knots of speed.
Arisan fought to save his plane, but just 400 feet above the ground and only 1.5 kilometers from the runway, the Boeing 737 suddenly fell straight down. It only took a few seconds for it to hit the ground.
Turkish 1951.
The recording sheds light on the final minutes of the flight. The crew was configuring their plane for landing well after it should have been done.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
Most airlines have regulations that call for a flight to be stabilized, to have all checklists completed by the time the plane hits 1,000 feet.
In instrument conditions, you're required at 1,000 feet to have basically everything done. The airplane is configured, you have slowed, you have run your before landing check, and you have received your landing clearance. And from 1,000 feet on in, you just monitor the instruments, and we're looking for the runway.
Please warn the cabin crew.
Cabin crew.
In fact, this crew was still running their checklist up to the moment the crisis hit, 460 feet above the ground.
This approach was not stabilized.
Because the aircraft was unstable, the flight crew was in a very high workload environment in the last 1,000 feet of flight.
The radio altimeter was malfunctioning. The aircraft was giving off warnings. The crew was assigned a challenging approach, and they were executing a checklist late. But none of this explains why Flight 1951 crashed.
In these type of accidents, you can never get inside the head of the pilots. And that's a very frustrating type of accident.
But the flight data recorder does provide another intriguing clue. Moments before Flight 1951 hit the ground, the plane's engines were at idle, hardly providing any power. Perhaps this accident is a repeat of the Heathrow incident.
The engines, it was interesting to note, were at idle approximately the last 2 minutes of flight, until the very end when the thrust was increased again. That was a big red flag right there. The question is why was that the case?
But then they spot something that's very different from the accident at Heathrow.
Retard flare mode.
For some reason, while still more than 1,000 feet above the ground, the plane's computer began preparing to touch down. In retard flare mode, engine power is reduced to idle by the flight computer, and the plane's nose automatically pitches up to the flare position. Planes should only be in this configuration just before they touch the ground.
The autopilot raises the nose to break the descent. The autothrottles brings the power back to flight idle, and you touch down with the power either all the way in idle or just about to be in idle.
But Flight 1951 went into a slow, nose-up position well before touchdown, causing the plane to fly slower and slower throughout its descent. So why was Flight 1951 in landing mode? And why hadn't any of the 3 crew members noticed how slowly they were flying?
So, what else was going on when the engines went to idle?
The trouble seems to start with the malfunctioning altimeter.
We had to look at the system as a whole and see how that -8 affected the other systems on the aircraft. And that was a very big portion of this investigation. We had to say, how did the autopilot use that data? More importantly, how did the auto throttle use that data?
The computer that flies the plane consists of 2 main systems, the autopilot and the auto throttle. The auto throttle determines how much power to ask the engines for, while the autopilot controls the plane's altitude and direction. The 2 systems work independently of each other, and only one of the radio altimeters provides information to the autothrottle.
In this case, I had to learn everything there was about radio altimeters and autothrottle systems, which I didn't know before.
The pieces of the puzzle begin coming together when they find the connection between the faulty radio altimeter and engine power.
The radio altimeter provides information to the autothrottle from the captain's side.
The only altimeter feeding information to the autothrottle was the captain's, and it was wrong. It showed -8 feet throughout most of Flight 1951's approach. It's beginning to look like the faulty radio altimeter triggered the events that led to the crash. Investigators need to know what went wrong with it. On a 737, the transmitting and receiving antennas for both radio altimeters are lined up underneath the cockpit. 3 of the antennas were all but destroyed in the crash. They can't be tested. But 1 antenna from the captain's side is undamaged. Investigators consider 2 possibilities: a failure of one of the components, or some sort of interference that caused the faulty reading. The only component that survived the crash checks out. The computers that control the system also work. But investigators do make a curious discovery about them. They aren't the same ones that were installed on the plane when it was delivered to Turkish Airlines 7 years ago. This find changes the focus of the investigation.
The maintenance aspect of This accident aircraft was one that we looked at as deeply as we could.
When the plane's maintenance log is studied, investigators find that the radio altimeter on this plane had a problematic history.
We got additional data from Turkish Airlines, and that data showed that on this one aircraft, of the past, I believe, over 1,000 flights, there was about 150 flights that had faulty radio altimeter systems.
The documents show that a little more than a year before the crash, both computers were replaced because of complaints they were causing faulty readings. One of the incidents involved a radio altimeter reading of -8 feet.
So that was telling us that there was an issue that had been there. The issue did not just occur on this flight.
The faulty readings persisted. Mechanics repeatedly swapped the computers and replaced the antennas to try to solve the problem. It's determined that Turkish Airlines tried several ways to fix the altimeter, but they couldn't find a repair that worked. At the time of the accident, Turkish Airlines had a fleet of 52 Boeing 737-800 series airplanes.
It's on page 93.
When we reviewed the maintenance data, we found that radio altimeter problems had been written up several times on both the accident airplane and the fleet.
Investigators discover that in the year before the crash, Turkish Airlines dealt with 235 system faults with the radio altimeters on their 737s. Fixes ranged from replacing and exchanging antennas, cleaning of the systems, exchanging and replacing the computers, and installing gaskets to shield the system from possible water damage.
It's not like they weren't doing anything about it.
The Turkish Airlines maintenance personnel knew that the radio altimeter problem was one of their highest issues with regard to maintenance.
16 of those altimeter repairs were made to the plane that crashed in February 2009. If the problem was so widespread, investigators wonder why it hadn't caused serious problems before this accident. They don't have to dig too far back to find out that in fact it had, on this very same plane.
On 2 recent flights, they had the exact same problem.
Twice in the 48 hours leading up to the accident, the radio altimeter showed a negative reading, putting the plane into retard flare mode. Both times the crew noticed the problem, disengaged the auto throttles, and brought the plane in for a safe landing.
You just disconnect it and fly the airplane.
In the months after the crash, other operators come forward with similar stories. In Australia, in the Netherlands, in Canada, in Austria, pilots report their 737s going into retard flare mode when the left radio altimeter showed a faulty reading. Each of those crews reacted the same way. They disengaged the auto throttle and pushed the power back up manually. They all landed safely.
Things are going to break on an airplane, and usually you're able to identify that and take that out of, make it so that it's not a threat for the landing.
In 2008, Boeing received a whopping 2,569 reports of faulty radio altimeters on their latest 737s. But very few of those cases involved the plane going into retard flare mode.
Hardly any reports at all.
Boeing also tried but couldn't find the cause of the failures. They concluded that the radio altimeter problem was not a threat to safety because the 737 gives off enough warnings so that crews can intervene and land safely. In fact, in every instance where the radio altimeter failed, crews were able to recover. Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 seems to be the one exception. Investigators still don't know why.
It really got us wondering of what happened. And that's when we started to look really closely at the actions of the flight crews while it was on that final approach in less than 1,000 feet.
Finally, as investigators again revisit the last minutes of Flight 1951, the circumstances of the tragedy become clear. They see a remarkable sequence of events that transpire to bring down this plane.
So, what was happening when the plane went into retard flare mode?
They discover that the plane went into landing mode and pulled back power at the worst possible moment, exactly as the crew was descending to meet the glide slope.
It masked what was actually happening.
As the crew configured their plane to drop down to meet the glide slope, they expected the plane to slow down as part of that maneuver. But the plane was actually slowing down because the computer was in landing mode. That's why none of the 3 pilots said anything about the throttles moving to idle.
It was insidious. Where it first captured in the retard mode, it didn't hurt them at all because they were actually high and they were a little bit fast. And the pilots actually wanted the power back anyway. In fact, the throttles may have already been in the flight idle mode as they were trying to get down and slow down.
Right, the trouble starts here at 8,300 feet, 13 miles out from the airport, minutes before the crash.
Amsterdam. Turkish 1951, descending 7,000, speed 250.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4,000. Speed okay for ILS 18, right.
Radio altimeter.
Would the crew have known that because of that radio altimeter, they would have gone to a retard flare mode in the throttles? No.
It was a common problem at the airline, but the crew couldn't see the risk it posed this flight.
We have an airplane that was malfunctioning in a very minor way, but in a way that, if not caught, could and did metastasize into something much more virulent.
Turkish 1951, descend to 2,000.
2,000, 1951.
Turkish 1951, left heading 210, cleared approach 18 right.
Left 210, cleared ILS, Turkish 1951.
Now left at 210 degrees, maintaining 2,000 feet, brings the flight in right here, 5.5 miles out. They now have to intercept the glide slope from above.
At 2,000 feet, with the glide slope below them, the pilots have to reduce their speed while descending steeply.
Speed 140.
They believe the throttles are moving back for the descent to the glide slope. In fact, the auto throttle is slowing the plane down because it's gone into landing mode. It will continue to slow the plane until it stalls.
What we found is that when the flight crew was doing their before landing checklist, each one of them was doing something while they should have been monitoring their airspeed.
For the next 100 seconds, no one notices what's happening. Until it's too late.
Established altitude set.
1,000.
Check.
Flaps 40.
Speed set.
The experienced pilot recognized that the first officer was probably a little bit behind on the approach, so he calls for flaps 40 and moves the lever, informing the first officer that he has done so. He's trying to help the first officer catch up to the position of the aircraft.
Speed brake.
Speed brake armed. Green light.
One thing at a time. Landing gear.
The plane is now 700 feet from the ground.
Gear down. 3 green.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
In their haste to complete their checklist, none of the 3 crew members notice the warnings that their speed is dropping dangerously. First, a red bar appeared on their flight display. Then, when the airspeed continued to drop, a flashing box appeared around their actual airspeed to draw the pilot's attention to it. At this point, no one sees either.
Cabin report confirmed.
The aircraft is now 600 feet from landing.
When things start changing colors, it's a warning to you, it's a caution to you that you're approaching the limits of the aircraft.
Missed approach. Altitude set.
500.
So all of these indications the crew has in front of them saying that the aircraft is slowing down. During that time, they were still completing their checklist.
Of course, the aircraft is getting closer to the ground.
In fact, it's less than 500 feet from touchdown.
And right before the stick shaker started, the captain told the safety pilot,
Please warn the cabin crew.
Cabin crew, take your seats. Speed, sir.
I have control.
By the time they advanced the throttles to full power, it was unrecoverable. They were too low for the engines to catch up.
And that's it. It's now too late to save this plane. They all knew about the altimeter problem, but knowing didn't help.
Boeing also didn't foresee the potentially deadly effect of a faulty altimeter. But on February the 25th, 2009, it triggered an unusual sequence of events that brought down a jetliner and killed 9 people. The official report into the accident blames it on a convergence of circumstances.
There is never, ever just one cause to an airline accident. It simply doesn't exist. Maybe someday God will swap one out of the sky, but until then, there's never one cause.
The Dutch report also points out that Boeing could have realized the problem with the radio altimeter system could have had an impact on safety. Given that no one foresaw how that failure might cause a crash, the Turkish Airlines accident raises a big question. Are airplanes becoming too complex? Investigators have determined that Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 crashed mainly because the pilots didn't recognize the consequences of the warnings they were getting.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4,000.
This is not the first plane to crash because the crew didn't understand what their plane was telling them.
Our problem is not the automation. Our problem is the depth of the training and the ability of the human beings to recover from mistakes made in interfacing with the automation.
Mika Ensley studies the relationship between pilots and technology.
We haven't really designed the automation to take best advantage of what people do well and take away the parts that people don't do well.
In 1996, the crew of an Aero Peru 757 crashed when the pilots couldn't decipher contradictory warnings about their altitude and airspeed. The plane flew into the Pacific Ocean. 61 passengers and 9 crew members were killed. In 1995, the flight management system on a Boeing 757 could and should have steered the plane to a safe landing in Cali, Colombia. But a last-minute change to the flight plan meant the crew had to reprogram their computer. They mistakenly entered a course that took them headlong into a 9,000-foot mountain. 159 people died in the crash.
The cautionary tale here is that we can get this equipment, we can get these silicon-based units, if you will, so sophisticated that we can't talk to them effectively. And when they go berserk, or they have a problem, or we misprogram them, we end up putting ourselves and our passengers in danger while we're trying to figure it out.
NASA is working on something called the Integrated Intelligent Flight Deck. It's a project aimed at helping humans better use the technology that surrounds them in the cockpit.
They're looking at automated flight manual systems, voice recognition systems. They've developed new kinds of microphones that are bone-conducting chips. They're developing new displays for understanding the ground environment, for being able to detect where other aircraft are in the environment.
What some researchers are finding is that the best technology shouldn't replace pilots, but work with them.
Really integrating people with technology more effectively has to do with designing the displays so that you can really understand what it's doing, and you can make it simpler to understand how to make it do what it is you want it to do. You shouldn't have to push 16 buttons through 8 levels of menus to figure out what's going on with the system. It should be integrated and presented effectively. It should be as easy to communicate with as the person next to you.
Boeing and Airbus, the 2 largest manufacturers of passenger planes, take very different approaches to the relationship between humans and technology. Airbus gives the flight computer much of the decision-making power in the cockpit.
In their view, this is a way to prevent a lot of human errors by making sure the airplane doesn't do something that's going to cause a crash, even if the humans wanted to.
But Boeing has a different view. Its philosophy is to provide information to pilots and have them make decisions.
Having more information is better for the pilot, having the pilot in the loop, in the equation, so to speak. I kind of like that.
Airbus will argue vociferously and in continuous fashion that that view is archaic and incorrect. I think the jury is still out.
The final report into the Turkish Airlines tragedy blames the crash of Flight 1951 partly on a failure of technology.
The erroneous radio altimeter data caused the autothrottle to go to an improper mode that is, of course, not a good situation.
The cause of the radio altimeter failure was never uncovered. The Dutch investigation asks Boeing to improve the reliability of the system.
We learned a lot about the radio altimeter system and how it affects the autothrottle system. Boeing is currently working on system improvements to prevent this type of autothrottle event from occurring again.
But the report also faults the crew for not noticing that their airspeed was dropping dangerously low, in spite of the fact that there were 3 pilots on board.
Forget that you got an autothrottle. You look at the airspeed, and you look at the altitude. You look out the damn window if you want to, but airspeed is a crucial component of staying alive in an airplane. And you always need to know what your airspeed is.
But to Mika Ensley, the crew's failure to monitor instruments is entirely understandable and may be more the fault of the instruments than the crew.
It's actually very difficult for people to be monitors of automation. One of the things that people don't do a good job of actually is monitoring. We're very good on-the-spot decision makers. We're very good at coming up with creative solutions to problems, but repetitive monitoring is the kind of thing that actually people aren't very good at all. So what we have to do is design automation to work with people in a way that keeps them more actively, cognitively involved and in the loop, and not just monitoring a piece of automation to say, is it doing what it's supposed to be doing?
Who's the ultimate computer? The pilot, the individual who should be able to say, I don't know what this thing is doing to me, but I'm punching it off and flying the airplane. Fly the jet. Probably the smartest thing we ever learned to say in our training in the airlines, fly the jet. Do that first or nothing else counts. That's what they forgot to do.